Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming Revolution, and we got a World War III alert. This is a World War III alert. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, revolution is where life and revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got some revolutionary dinner for y'all. Putin has seized Europe's largest lithium mine. I don't know what this is, a couple of trillion. Salute, family. What is a couple of trillion to the good now? For Putin, he had 10 trillion earlier he had took. This a few trillion more. This is why they're lying about some type of Ukrainian offensive. To cover this up, let's get right into it. Salute, family. This is very devastating news for NATO.
Russia has seized control of Europe's largest lithium deposit, marking a significant strategic victory in its ongoing military campaign in Ukraine. The capture of Shevchenko village in the Donetsk region represents a critical turning point in the conflict's mineral resource landscape. Military intelligence confirms Russian forces have claimed a lithium deposit that could dramatically reshape global battery production and green energy markets. The deposit, confirmed through recent geological assessments, is characterized by 6 pegmatite bodies with lithium mineralization, particularly the spodumene variety. According to military...
Lindsey Graham was just telling us they wanted this lithium. They didn't want Putin and China. Now, Russia didn't need this lithium. Russia got more resources in this country than anybody else. But to keep this out the hands of NATO, Putin absolutely has crippled the dreams of NATO by getting this.
Military correspondent Boris Rozhin, the lithium-containing reservoir extends towards Belarus, positioning Russia to potentially control a substantial portion of critical mineral resources. Detailed geological studies reveal the deposit's impressive characteristics. Total balance of lithium ores estimated at around 90%. Lithium content varying from 0.3 to 4%, with an average of 1.2%. Estimated reserves of 14 million tons of lithium ore. Potential for underground mining due to deposit depth and sediment structure. The European Union had previously identified Ukraine as a crucial source for green energy transition minerals, making this capture...
The European Union said that was their lithium. Yes, since that's the largest lithium mine in Europe, they was going to get their hands on it, and it was going to turn Europe into a green energy superpower. Well, not anymore, because Russia has that now.
Particularly significant. Experts like Gracelyn Bhaskaran from the Center for Strategic and International Studies note that while the deposit represents about 2% of global reserves, it's critically important for decarbonization efforts. Ukrainian military leadership describes the fighting in the region as extremely fierce, with Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky reporting intense Russian pressure on defensive positions. The capture of Shevchenko village brings Russian forces closer to the critical logistics hub of Pokrovsk, potentially threatening broader Ukrainian defensive strategies. The international community, particularly the European Union, is preparing a multifaceted response to Russia's strategic mineral seizure. Implementation of Council Regulation 2024-1745, providing frameworks for EU operators to recover damages. Imposing asset freeze restrictions on entities benefiting from compulsory ownership transfers, increasing diplomatic pressure through international forums.
See how Putin played them? They stole $300 billion in Russian assets, froze it, and they've been giving Ukraine Russia's money, the interest off of it, billions of dollars of interest off the money. See, Putin, chess player, he already knew. He is trillions of dollars up. He's just laughing at them. Resistance is futile. You stole $300 billion. Now he got 2-3 trillion, or maybe more, of lithium.
exploring economic countermeasures to mitigate resource control. US Senator Lindsey Graham highlighted the mineral wealth at stake, describing Ukraine as sitting on a gold mine of critical resources. The lithium deposit's seizure could potentially transfer billions of dollars worth of strategic minerals to Russian control, with potential implications for global energy markets. Military analysts suggest this move is part of a calculated strategy to control strategically important natural resources. Olivia Lazard from Carnegie Europe emphasizes Russia's systematic approach to acquiring iron ore, rare earths, and transition materials through military operations. The implications.
None of that shit. Anybody in the world can look it up. Russia has more natural resources than anybody else. They got plenty. They got plenty. Everything you ever needed is in Russia. This cripples the West. They was eyeing this. Russia didn't give a damn about this shit. It got its own resources.
Extend beyond immediate military objectives. Energy expert Andrei Kovatariu warns that losing control of such resources could significantly impact the European Union's ability to develop a robust battery industry. The capture threatens Ukraine's potential economic recovery and green energy aspirations. Potential consequences include supply chain disruptions, increased global lithium prices, and a potential slowdown in electric vehicle and renewable energy technologies. The strategic importance of this
slowdown in the West, not in the East, not with Russia and its friends, not with China. No. The West, they're gonna face green energy, a lithium battery crunch. Now they gotta find somewhere else to leach and roach.
Deposit goes far beyond its immediate mineral value. As the conflict continues, international observers are watching closely. The capture of Shevchenko and its lithium deposit represents more than a territorial gain. It's a critical move in the complex geopolitical chess game
all over the news right now. They're talking about Ukraine's advance into Russia. You see, I didn't know what are they doing that BS for? Because they're losing more territory in Ukraine, and they just lost the largest mine in Europe. So what story is the biggest? You losing a bunch of tanks and a bunch of men trying to capture potato fields. You trying to take potato fields from Russia, or losing the largest lithium mine in Europe. I would think it's losing the largest lithium mine, but they don't want you to know that.
Folding in Eastern Europe. Ukrainian military commanders remain committed to defending their territory, but the loss of this strategic location presents significant challenges. The ongoing conflict continues to reshape regional dynamics, with natural resources emerging as a key battleground in modern warfare. This development underscores the complex interplay between military conflict, natural resources, and global energy transitions. As Russia consolidates its position, the international community must reassess its strategic approaches to resource security and geopolitical challenges.
It's only going to get worse.
With the one and only, the man himself of the hour, Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof is a former senior security, former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, a regular contributor analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense and is a great friend of this show. Happy New Year, Michael. How you doing, man? You doing all right today?
I'm great. I've already started to shovel the snow outside, and all's good.
Have you? Yeah, it's snowing in Richmond. So yeah, it's snowing here too. I went out this morning, or at the very least, when I look out the window this morning, you have this nice little thin thread of snow covering everything.
We have about 5 inches right now.
Where are you located? You're in DC, or where are you?
In Reston, just outside of DC.
Oh, so you're okay. See, I just left DC Friday, so I don't necessarily know what's going on the ground up there. But wow, just be careful.
It all happened after midnight. And it's going to continue throughout the day and into the night.
Oh, that's unfortunate because I need to drive to DC.
Well, we only get this once every 3 to 4 years, and anything beyond an inch is a snowmageddon here. You know that.
People freak out. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, there's an inch of snow. So I brought you on because, and I'm really appreciate you coming on because I wanted to get into this quote unquote counteroffensive that Ukraine apparently launched over the weekend. That they're doubling down in Kiev, which is wild to me because the reality of it is they seem to acknowledge at this point that this war is lost. And even if you listen to Blinken, when Blinken, they were asking him, hey, do you have any expectation that Ukraine is going to take any territory? And the answer was no. And so, you want them to mobilize their children, 18-year-olds, I consider 18-year-olds kids. You want to mobilize their teenagers. You acknowledge that there's no real expectation that they're really going to do anything militarily in that mobilization, short of getting those people killed. And now they did this buildup just before Joe Biden left, giving all of this money, weapons, et cetera, for an offensive in Kursk. Why are they continuing to double down in Kursk when they seem to be losing more and more territory in the Donbass region? Karahovo has just been liberated or fallen, depending upon your point of view. So they're losing in the area that the main conflict is taking place on the Donbass line, while simultaneously doubling down in Kursk that doesn't really have a military significance. What is going on here? Explain this to us. Make this work for us.
Well, you've asked a very interesting question because even strategists have a hard time figuring out what was the strategy, what was the point. And I think if you're to push this to an extreme, you could say, well, it was to try and gain leverage in any future negotiation. Okay, well, in taking over the Kursk region or invading the Kursk region, which was doomed from the start, not even the Nazis during World War II could achieve that with a full bore war machine. The Ukrainians pulled troops out of the Donbass area, which is precisely the region where the Russians just made a breakthrough this morning. So major breakthrough. So it's you have to ask the question, what's the strategy here? And again, the only conceivable notion is to gain leverage to swap territories, and that's doomed to failure because the Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region, in essence, have been contained. They are and they haven't been killed, but they did lose a considerable number of troops just in the taking of this major city and in the Donbass region, which opens up the territory westward into the rest of Ukraine if Russia so desires. But it does capture the what is a major hub for the Russians, and you have Ukrainian troops contained up in the Kursk Oblast, which is a Russian Federation territory. It's just not going to work. They'll be lucky they can get those troops back alive. Yeah. And I think that just in the Kosovo area, they lost 80% of their troops in that latest onslaught, and captured tremendous amounts of or destroyed a lot of ordnance and armor, and this I mean, it's armor that they're limited in. And you mentioned the mobilization efforts to sacrifice troops like this. The Ukrainians are desperate for manpower, and they want to get the kids. I'm hearing anywhere from 15 to 18 now. They want to mobilize. This is, I think the Ukrainian people, or what's left of them, need to rise up and say, we've had enough of this crap, and do something about it on their own. They've got to take action.
Well, in the Gallup polling, it showed that the majority at this point wanted it to stop. Like literally the majority for the first time said, stop. Even if we have to give up territory, we want it to stop. And I guess my thing is this kind of dichotomy between the main conflict is taking place for Donbass. It's like 1,000-kilometer front. It's everybody understands it in that context. And yet they've doubled down in Kursk. So not only did they go for an offensive, and that offensive has effectively failed, as you point out, they retained, they continued to do another offensive in Kursk after getting this kind of buildup of weapons from Joe Biden just before he left, like on his way out. It doesn't make sense to me. Like you are losing, like for example, recently Russia has just taken Karakovo. They've just raised the flag over it in its entirety, which, as you point out, gives them open step once they get to what Petrovsk is going to be one of the next main hubs. But after that, it's just open step to the Dnieper. They have to know this. They have to be aware of this. And yet they're still messing around in Kursk, something to which they've already been contained in. I guess they're trying to get a breakthrough from the Russian lines in that case. I don't get the military significance. I just don't. Is it really just negotiations?
As I said, strategists are scratching their heads over it too. I think Blinken, in his comments this morning, conceded that it was to gain leverage for territorial swap. But anytime Blinken opens his mouth, he steps his foot in it. So I think he just should shut up and leave. He's just useless. And but that's just my personal opinion. But but the reality is they're desperate. The Ukrainians are desperate. You even have Zelensky now appealing to Trump to in exchange for the frozen assets of Russian or the interest on frozen assets, Russian assets. He wants to pay for more arms. And he's appealing to the incoming Trump administration to do that. I don't think Trump wants that. He has his designs. He has his priorities elsewhere, and Ukraine certainly is not one of them. He wants to settle it, get it over with, and move on. It's just like he wants to get rid of this problem. He has another focus, and that is on the United States internally, cleaning up internally inside the United States by the mess and the self-inflicted wounds that the Biden administration has imposed upon the American people for the last 4 years. And if you look at his evolving strategy, it is more in our U.S. region. He's looking more in terms of reintroducing, if you will, the notion of the spheres of influence. And Ukraine would be in the Russian sphere of influence, and Greenland, Panama, what's the other place he wants to take over?
Canada. Right.
That is his sphere of influence, and there's active discussion about these things going on. That is his priority, and people say, well, why Greenland? It's just nothing but a hunk of ice. Well, they have not only valuable resources, but Greenland also is a very strategic location. We have bases up in the northern part of Greenland to monitor activities in the Arctic region, and it also is meant to basically assist in our mutual defense with Canada. So his interests are more in our region as opposed to dealing with questionable wars and ancient wars and in other parts of the world, like in Europe. I mean, we've bailed them out twice. How many more times do we have to do it? And now they're bringing, and they want to resurrect centuries old alliances and reestablish those alliances. We see that with Poland, with Lithuania. They used to have a joint republic back in the 15th century. Are we going to get involved in that? No. And that's why Poland, for example, latched on to becoming a NATO member. They wanted to use NATO for that purpose. Well, I see NATO fracturing. you're not going to get 32 members of NATO to come up with a unanimous approach on anything any longer. And I think that's why you're going to see the beginning of the end of NATO for sure. And they're going to probably fracture into more regional alliances, defense alliances, like Scandinavian, European, African, and so on.
I want to play this clip because you mentioned it with Zelensky, but I also want to bounce back for a moment to Europe, because Europe, they don't seem to understand that they're being damaged in their association with NATO. It's very weird to me. I mean, first things first, this is Zelensky having this conversation. I mean, there's a few of these clips that are just fantastic. When one of them, they ask him, does Putin love Russia? And he goes on this tirade as if the answer is no. It's very bizarre. But in this case, he's talking about Trump. And he is attacking Biden kind of with a backhand slap as he basically shows fealty and allegiance to Donald Trump.
He was strong. He was much more stronger than Kamala Harris, Biden first, and then Kamala Harris. Yes, he showed that he can intellectually and physically. It was an important point to show that if you want to have a strong country, you have to be strong, and he was strong. And this number of rallies, what I said, is not a simple thing. He showed that he can. He is strong. So he doesn't have any questions with his, this age and etc. Nothing. He is young. He is young here, and his brains work. So I think it's important.
He's young. Sorry. He's young here, and his brains work. That I didn't realize that was, an issue. But now, clearly this is aimed at Joe Biden, effectively saying Joe Biden is not quite in his right mind. And look, man, he is. I would imagine that they are going to have to use surgery to remove his lips off of Trump's ass. Because he is clearly kissing ass in this interview.
Oh yeah, there's no question about it.
He already worked.
I agree with you. He
impeached.
He's trying to butter up now. He recognizes that the torch is passed with respect to Biden. Yep. Biden came through for him. I mean, to date, the United States has provided some $300 billion in military and financial assistance to Ukraine. That's a sizable chunk of change. Yeah. And yet it wasn't enough. And combined with the other allied countries of NATO, it just wasn't enough. It clearly showed that his strategy was inept. Even if he was going to go to war, to even contemplate that against the Russian Federation was folly in the first place. But now to do this and cater. I mean, the man lacks authority. He's under martial law. His term had expired as president. Mm-hmm. He and the Russians refused to negotiate with him personally because of his legal standing in the Ukrainian government. So they're going to have to do something. That's why I'm saying it's time for the Ukrainian people to take the initiative and make things right, to try to settle this thing once and for all. And that means that they need on their own to settle this thing. Otherwise, it's going to take out. I presume they want the United States to come in and plant another government that will be doomed to failure, because all of our regime change efforts to date, from Libya to Afghanistan to Iraq, have failed. So if this is what they want, I think it's folly, and we need to move on and shut it down and move on.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that part too, because there was something that Zelensky said in relation to that one also, where he's saying that effectively this interview was weird because, for one, he's speaking in 3 different languages. He's speaking in English, Ukrainian, and Russian. He doesn't seem to speak in Ukrainian well, so he keeps going back to Russian in regards to the way he's giving the speech. So right off the bat, it's a little bit strange. In this case, though, he's talking about Trump, effectively saying that world leaders look to Trump. Again, surgically remove his lips from Trump's ass, that world leaders are looking at Trump for some level of idea on what is going to take place in the world. Now, that's astonishing when you think about it. Like, he is in the middle of a war, and he is effectively admitting that this is going to be something they're going to have to go to Trump in order to resolve, that he is not master of his own domain in the context of the war. That by itself is a pretty heavy admission. But I want to get your take on what he's saying.
It won't be long.
About how, I think I'm paraphrasing, but they look to him and he looks to the US or something to that effect. But I want to get your take on this commentary.
Because Europe will be looking at us and will be looking at Trump. And by the way, I now see that when I talk about something with Donald Trump, whether we meet in person or we just have a call, all the European leaders always ask, how was it? This shows the influence of Donald Trump. And this has never happened before with an American president. I tell you, from my experience.
You know, what's wild about this clip, and I think the most maybe disturbing thing about the clip, under normal circumstances, and I want to get your take on it, under normal circumstances, when a country is at war, that country themselves are making decisions about what's in their best interests for the war. And when you get to a certain point where they're like, okay, we can't proceed, we can't win this, we're going to stop because we're trying to save our own people, we're going to save the territory that we have and come to some kind of agreement, some kind of deal. Zelensky is not in a position to make that deal. And not just not in a position, when he wanted to make the deal for the Istanbul agreements, he was not allowed to make that deal by Western forces led by Boris Johnson coming into the country representing, of course, America in doing so. And to make it even worse, even now, if you notice, he says, well, Europe looks to us and we look to America. Basically, America is going to be the end all be all in whether or not the war continues or the war stops. But think about what that means, though. That means that a country that is not your own is making decisions on your own people's life and death issues. Whereas the Ukrainians may at a certain point want to stop because it's not in their best interest to continue. Well, we are the ones who are making the choice, not Ukrainians. This is not about whether or not this is in America's best interest for Americans to fight. This is whether or not it's in America's best interest for Ukraine to keep fighting. That's a weird dynamic on the battlefield. Give me your take on that. I mean, do you agree or disagree with that, first of all?
No, I think I think he has conceded defeat without saying so. He's almost like a dog who is put on its back and shows its belly and concedes. I mean, in a dog fight. I mean, he now realizes that following the advice of the Europeans brought him to the point where he is now, and also the Europeans can no longer support him. So where else do you turn? To the United States, because they remain the superpower. And but Trump has another agenda, as I pointed out earlier. The reality is that Europe itself will not be able to do anything to assist him, and I think he's basically conceding that, and he's appealing for U.S. support, but it's too little, too late, and the United States gave what it could in association with other NATO countries to back him up, but he failed. He failed it because the Biden administration for the last 4 years left it up to the Zelensky to figure out how to conduct that war, and that was a total disaster, and he lacked basic elements. For example, air power. If he was going to fight a war, you want to have your air power. He didn't have the air power, and so he resorted to drones, which is a poor substitute. Although it's like bad. It's like swatting mosquitoes with these drones. It's not like being bombed with 500-pound bombs from an F-16. You know, it's different, and you need, and it allowed Russia to bring in its heavy armor, and being in the middle of winter now, the territory that the frozen land is ideal for them to start moving that and to move their troops in, and also you use air power to bomb minefields. I mean, Russia had the luxury of the time to lay out miles of mines for the tanks against the Ukrainians, and they just lost 80% of their armor in this latest fiasco in the Donbass. I mean, it's just it's suicide, and they again, the Ukrainian people need to say enough, and the Europeans have already basically telegraphing that. They're saying enough because they are just about out of storage of their own natural gas and basic resources. They don't have the industrial capacity and infrastructure to switch over to a war production. They just don't have it.
Yeah, they can do it if they wanted to.
And it's going to take them a generation. It's going to take them a generation to recover from what they have lost now in terms of the quality of life, and the people themselves are against continuing this thing because they see that it's not amounting to anything. It's actually driving them greater and greater into economic upheaval.
Right. So why do European leaders continue with this nonsense then? I mean,
it's the leaders. The people. The leadership has one set of ideas. The people have another. It's up to the people now, and we're seeing this in Europe with the rise of more of the the right wing types coming in, and they're gaining popularity. And if short of a violent revolution, if they can do it through the ballot box, that's probably going to be the answer. But clearly, Trump has shown more of brought back the populist notion, and the Europeans want the same thing. They're beginning to show that this effort is futile, and they need to take charge of their own destiny in effect, rather than just worrying about Ukraine. They got to worry about themselves now because of their economic and political plight.
Is Russia going to attack the oil pipelines? Ukraine has stopped oil going to Europe. They've effectively saying, well, this is no longer going to take place. We're not going to renew the contracts. So Europe is now going without Russian oil coming through Ukraine. Apparently there's another one going through, the Yamal pipeline in Turkey. But for all intents and purposes for the Ukrainian pipelines, it has stopped. And Europe is going to have to somehow make up the oil or the gas that they're going to miss. They're going to pay it.
I don't think they'll attack them. I don't think they'll attack the pipelines because they see that again as a source of future revenue gain. And Putin has basically signaled as much that he wants them to reconsider and start getting back on track and be smart about it and start getting cheaper oil and gas and get off this kick of trying to dominate or take over or bust up the Russian Federation. It's not going to happen. I haven't been to Russia twice last year. And spoken to Russian people. They are more solid than ever behind Putin.
Do you think that we can ever go back to that norm? Or do you think, meaning, because the U.S. has a clear interest in this, right? I mean, from one point of view, we didn't like the idea that there was pipelines connecting Europe to Russia. We wanted them to buy our gas, not the Russian gas. We were able to blow up Nord Stream, so we were able to accomplish that. We were able to poison the relationship between Europe and between Russia. So that, again, also was an accomplishment. All of these things were American objectives that were not in the interests of Europe, but the European leaders still went along with it under this kind of fig leaf of Ukraine. Do you think they get back to common sense? Or do you think, no, we're in a new era where there's this kind of bifurcation of the world between Eastern and Western spheres? What are your thoughts?
I think inevitably there is that division. It will remain. We've had to bail Europe out of 2 wars already, and they just seem to have a suicidal bent on engagement and historically against Russia. The history of the UK against Russia goes back centuries, and we've discussed that. They've also and it goes back to the days when there was a British Empire. Particularly such as in Central Asia, when they were competing for influence in that region. the UK has never forgiven the Russians. Has never forgiven the Russians for that, and as a consequence, this animosity continues. And as I may have said, I keep telling some of my British friends, look, you guys still think you're an empire, but larger than the state of Indiana.
I know.
And
but you're this tiny little country.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy. They've got to get their mind into the 21st century rather than the 18th and 17th centuries, and get back into the 21st century and consider where they are right now, because they have a lot now of catching up to do as a result of supporting this war. And also, the world is more dangerous because of the existence now of hypersonic missiles, which give them warning times of like 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's a different world.
It is. And I think Putin has really been restrained and is waiting for Trump to come on board. They will talk. There's no question about it. They will talk. You raised another interesting point on trust. The Russians don't trust the West and the United States in particular. It was under Trump, frankly, that they sustained most of the sanctions and lost property that they purchased in the United States. This is and they've told me in the past they really despise being talked down to. They want to be treated as an equal strategic partner. And I think that, but you got Trump now bringing in the likes of Kellogg and Ortega once again. I mean, it just never ends. He's got to get rid of these neocons. These neocons are the ones who are pushing this narrative of not only supporting Netanyahu, but also supporting the containment of Russia, rather than treating them as an equal partner and working things out with them.
Russia wants,
we have to rebuild that trust. We have to rebuild that trust. And I think in Trump's second administration, he'll have that ability if he chooses to do so, because he no longer has hanging over his head the conspiracy hoaxes of Russian collusion for getting voted in and all that crap. He had to deal with that during that time period when he sanctioned Russia, in order to show that he didn't have that that closeness with Russia.
Yeah, it came with the context.
It hurt our relationship as a consequence.
I'm curious. I mean, Russia seems to want a new security architecture of Europe, not just the end of the war. And it's like the war ending, all of that stuff gets lumped into, okay, what is the new security architecture of Europe? Do you think they're going to get that? Meaning, do you think whatever this end to this war is, that will be by definition this kind of new security architecture and a platform to build a relationship?
I think it's inevitable to happen. As I pointed out, I think it's got to begin with the fracturing of NATO. I think the reality is that Trump coming on board says that in exchange for us to remain in NATO, you've got now to come up with 5% of your GDP to support yourself. They can't do it. They can't even do 2%. Many of them can't do. Most of them cannot do 2%. Some can do 3%, and certainly not 5%. The United States has been providing around 5% at least of GDP. So, and we can no longer support them because of our own financial issues that we have to deal with here. Yeah, 36 trillion. How do you pay that off? And there's going to be opposition. And it really is the beginning of the end for the United States if we can't cope with this and deal with it effectively and do it now. I mean, I hope it's not too late.
One last question before I let you go. HTS. Syria has gotten far more complicated in regards to the political relationships that have developed in Syria. And one of the most interesting ones has to do with this kind of relationship between Turkey and HTS, especially in the context of the Kurds, and for that matter, Lebanon. Because there's an expectation from people that I've spoken to on the ground that the moment that the ceasefire, and I'm putting that in quotes because Israel hasn't necessarily honored the ceasefire at all,
right.
But the moment that ceasefire is over with, that hostilities are going to erupt almost immediately right off the bat. And that the concern is that Lebanon is sandwiched between HTS, in one sense, a group of jihadists that have been doing these kind of border incursions into Lebanon, and Israel itself. Give me your take on this. I mean, this seems to be somewhat of a difficult position.
We're headed for a larger clash, if you will. Turkey cannot control HTS. HTS has told PKK, put down your arms. That satisfies Turkey on the one hand, but on the other hand, the clash ultimately, and Turkey cannot control HTS and Jelani, even though he's trying to give the outward appearance of wanting to be part of the international community. But
Right.
there are so many factions within his group that it's a question of time whether they'll effectively be able to hold on to them. The other thing is the real clash ultimately, I think, will come between Turkey and Israel. Turkey is once again, because of its neo-Ottoman vision, will clash over much of the same territory as the greater Israel concept that Netanyahu is professing. So I think that we have and also now he's taking the opportunity to talk once again, Netanyahu is, of going after Iran. He wants to drag the United States into bombing Iran. And he's got to he wants to get Trump locked in on that. I don't think Trump is going to go along with that. I hope not, because that will makes this a much larger regional conflict as a consequence, not just between them. And the Gulf Arab countries have been silent until now. But the one thing they don't want is Israel taking over all these lands. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they don't want to live under another neo-Ottoman empire. So we got to see which direction they go. I think we need to watch what Saudi Arabia decides and says to Trump ultimately, because they still want a two-state solution for Palestine, and they want to get back to the 67 borders. Israel is against that. If they want normalization, it's not going to happen. So I think that the clashes are yet to come.
Does Saudi Arabia really want a two-state solution? I mean, I get the sense that the leadership doesn't care one way or the other. It's just political.
Well, that's what they're insisting on. They're insisting on it now. Before the October 7th, when you did the Abraham Accords, Palestine wasn't even in the discussion.
Right.
But now it is. It's now prominent. It's now because of the slaughter and the extermination that the Israelis did of the Palestinians. You've got all the Arab countries sympathetic to the Palestinians in that regard. They can't ignore it. They just cannot ignore it.
We will see. I don't get this. I don't know. I don't get the sense that they care. I mean, but you could be right. I mean, like you said, in the Abraham Accords, it wasn't a factor. But with the amount of bloodshed, maybe it's gotten to the point where the leadership is kind of
we have seen a complete change in the political dynamic throughout the Middle East. Netanyahu changed everything. We're in an open, uncharted area now. All of the methods in the past of containing this or that, of trying to restrain other countries from going into warfare, have all been obliterated. We got a whole new concept now that's underway in the Middle East, and we just have to see how these players play. Turkey is going to be key, but Turkey is also aligned very closely with Russia and through Russia, Iran, and because if Iran is attacked, I think the Russians will intervene as a consequence.
One last question: on the issue of I'll kill it. I'll stop it here because I'm going to go down a rabbit hole.
Maybe another time.
Yeah, Michael, man, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. Michael Maloof, he's a former senior policy analyst.
A few hours ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially announced that the strategically important city of Korokovo, in the Donetsk People's Republic, had been completely liberated by units of the group of troops under the designation South. The Russian Defense Ministry noted that over the past 10 years, the Kiev regime, with the help of NATO military advisors, has turned this city into an impregnable fortress, with advanced underground communications and powerful firing points. In addition, there is a reservoir in the northern part of this city, which also significantly complicated the work of the Russian troops to liberate this strategically important settlement. Commenting on the complete liberation of Korokovo, even Russophobic Western think tanks did not hide their admiration for the professional actions of the Russian army. As it turned out, in order to hold this city, the Ukrainian army and NATO forces concentrated 27 battalions with a total of more than 20,000 soldiers in Korokovo. Among these Ukrainian soldiers were also ardent Nazis and so-called foreign mercenaries, many of whom were active duty soldiers of armies of NATO countries.
That's a fact.
In total, in the battle for Korokovo, the Ukrainian army and NATO forces lost more than 17,000 soldiers and 4,000 units of various military equipment, including 60 tanks and 80 units of infantry fighting vehicles. Many military experts expressed confidence that the military operation to liberate Korokovo, as well as Avdiivka, will go down in the history of military art and will be studied by future generations for many centuries. Meanwhile, after the complete liberation of Korokovo, the Russian army continued its victorious offensive in this direction of the front. So, on January 6, at 9 a.m. Moscow time, war correspondents confirmed the complete liberation by Russian troops of the settlement of Daknoy, west of Korokovo. It is noteworthy that on the same day, the Russian Defense Ministry also confirmed the liberation of this urban-type settlement. In particular, the representative of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, General Igor Konashenkov, officially stated that as a result of the professional and decisive actions of the units of the group of troops under the designation center, the settlement of Daknoy, in the Donetsk People's Republic, was completely liberated.
While fake news lying about Ukraine doing anything.
However, the victories of the Russian troops in the Special Military Operations Zone did not end there. So, on January 6, at 11 a.m. Moscow time, war correspondents reported on another Russian army's success in the Kursk direction of the front. In particular, it is reported that after yesterday's failed attack by the Ukrainian army in the Sudzansky district of the Kursk region, as a result of which Ukrainian troops lost about 400 soldiers and 30 units of heavy equipment, the Russian army did not give the enemy a break and launched a counteroffensive. As a result, Russian units from the group of troops under the designation Sever managed to dislodge the Ukrainian nationalists from the settlement of Leonidovo. Moreover, it is reported that after the liberation of this settlement, Russian troops built on their success, managing to advance 700 meters in the vicinity of this village. At the same time, it is worth noting that many reputable Russian military experts and analysts urge the Russian General Staff not to relax against the backdrop of the numerous successes of the Russian army in the Kursk region. In particular, they claim in all seriousness that yesterday's attack by the Ukrainian army was merely preparation for a full-scale offensive by Ukrainian and NATO forces. According to them, before the inauguration of Donald Trump, the Kiev regime will try to organize an offensive not only in the Kursk region, but also in the Belgorod and Bryansk regions. It is worth noting that Russian intelligence indirectly confirms the words of many military experts. In particular, the Russian military confirmed that during yesterday's attack, the Ukrainian army did not use all the reserves that were deployed to the borders of the Russian Federation. Meanwhile, Russia brutally took revenge on NATO and Ukraine for launching 8 ATACMS missiles on Belgorod region. Let me remind you that on January 3rd, the Ukrainian army, with the help of NATO officers, fired 8 ATACMS ballistic missiles deep into Russian territory. According to the Russian military department, all these ballistic missiles were shot down by the air defense system S-400 and the air defense missile gun system Panzer-SM.
Best air defense system in the world.
Back then, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially stated that this attack would not go unanswered, and that the enemy would soon answer for this crime. And now, almost 3 days later, Russia has kept its promise by delivering a crushing blow to the enemy. So, on the night of January 6, the Russian aerospace forces, together with the missile forces, launched a massive missile attack on military objects and energy infrastructure facilities in Ukraine. In particular, independent monitoring services recorded 20 powerful explosions in such Ukrainian regions as Zhytomyr, Cherkasy, Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, and Kiev.
Punishment.
So, in the Zhytomyr and Cherkasy regions, Russian kamikaze drones, together with cruise missiles, hit and destroyed several facilities of the military-industrial complex and energy sector. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, in the southwestern part of the city of Samar, Russian kamikaze drones hit and destroyed 2 classified weapons depots, where the Ukrainian army and NATO forces stored Western ballistic and cruise missiles. In the Sumy region, in the northwestern part of the settlement of Miropol, a Russian Iskander-M ballistic missile hit and destroyed a classified Ukrainian army's command post. Later, sources in the Russian military department confirmed that as a result of this missile attack, about 10 Ukrainian officers were killed, including 2 U.S. Army officers, who launched ATACMS missiles at Belgorod region on January 3rd. And finally, in the Kiev region, in the western part of the city of Biela Tserkva, Russian intelligence discovered and destroyed a classified NATO facility. As it turned out, it was a command center that distributed Western ballistic and cruise missiles arriving in Ukraine. Moreover, it was in this command center that the decision was made regarding which Russian region and city should be subjected to a missile attack. Sources in the Russian military department confirmed that as a result of a direct hit by an Iskander-M ballistic missile, 10 senior officers of the Security Service of Ukraine were killed, including 3 active-duty high-ranking NATO officers.
Russia.
Well, as we said back in December, right here on this show, Justin Trudeau would resign. Well, today Canadians got their Christmas wish. And in a way, it's like a little bit of a mixed bag. Yes, there is a resignation, but just listen to the way in which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, in fact, did resign or announce he's going to resign in March if they can't find another leader. Listen.
Over the holidays, I've also had a chance to reflect and have had long talks with my family about our future. Throughout the course of my career, any success I have personally achieved has been because of their support and with their encouragement. So last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the President of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
Ellie Stevens in our chat says Trudeau must face charges.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be amazing if so he prorogued the government, which was of course a new word to a lot of us in the United States. Prorogued the government, basically,
it's a big fat pause button.
Yeah, it
suspends
suspends Parliament. He basically puts them on sabbatical until March, and now it's sort of a position right now where they're basically in many ways without a government. Right as President Trump is coming into office, where they'll have cross-border international, massive decisions to make across the border of the United States into Canada, and he's not going to have a parliament.
No one to do business with.
Knock, knock. Oh, there's no one around. Your parliament is prorogued, and so he will still remain there until March.
I know that hasn't happened very many times, but wasn't one of them like? I mean, it was quite a while. It was a previous prime minister where there was like some scandal he was embroiled in, and then he just like sent Parliament away. Like they just kind of use it as like a defensive political maneuver.
Which is exactly well timed, because on Wednesday he was facing another emergency meeting of Parliament where they were going to again face a no confidence vote and call for his resignation. So he doesn't have to sit through that anymore because he's taken the rug out from under that idea.
And David Creighton's going to join us here in a few minutes to go more deeply into this. He's been following very closely, so we'll have David on in just a few minutes here. But look at the Canadian dollar on this news. This is the Canadian dollar skyrocketing just a short time ago on the news that Trudeau is leaving. So yeah, there's certainly an appetite for it. Donald Trump also getting in on this, posted this on Truth Social. Many people in Canada love being the 51st state. The United States can no longer suffer the massive trade deficits and subsidies that Canada needs to stay afloat. Justin Trudeau knew this and resigned. If Canada merged with the United States, there would be no tariffs, taxes would go way down, and they would be totally secure from the threat of the Russian and Chinese ships that are constantly surrounding them. Together, what a great nation it would be. Of course, they won't do that. Instead, they'd rather just have us send them $100 billion.
Yeah.
Or
I don't like this. I don't like the idea that he's talking about expansion of
he's joking.
United
He's trolling.
States.
He's been trolling this. This
right.
is totally
it sort of feeds the liberals' talking point that he wants ever expanding power.
Right.
So I don't like this. I also wish that he would take it seriously and say, let's make a real trading bloc. How about we do that in North America? How about we actually discuss a real trading bloc that works for all of North America?
Yeah, throw NAFTA out the Bill Clinton NAFTA program out, and actually put something in place that works for North America, rather than we have to, we lose $100 billion a year to Canada. Well, Pierre Poilievre, who is the conservative leader, and there is now a 92% probability on the polling, the polling Vegas odds that Pierre Poilievre will become the next prime minister of Canada. Here he spoke just a few minutes ago. Listen.
Good day. Canadians desperate to turn the page on this dark chapter in our history might be relieved today that Justin Trudeau is finally leaving. But what has really changed? Every Liberal MP in power today and every potential Liberal leadership contender fighting for the top job helped Justin Trudeau break the country over the last 9 years. All Liberal politicians actively worked to pass into law the job-killing inflationary carbon tax, a tax that Carbon Tax Carney endorsed in his book. All supported a law quadrupling the tax over the next 5 years. All voted for or actively supported Trudeau's out-of-control spending, debt, and immigration. All passed.
So his point here is that, in 3 months, the Liberal Party is going to put up another leadership. All of these people are corrupt. All of these people enabled Trudeau. So you're going to find somebody who is not a part of that? Right. He's saying there's a massive machine here of corruption who all enabled Trudeau. So good luck in March that you're suddenly going to find some sort of a liberal leader that can emerge.
Right. Where's your Thomas Massey in this pile? It's a needle in a haystack, because it's been a supported wall of authoritarianism under Justin Trudeau. So, nobody, get drunk on this celebration, because it's clearly not over for this authoritarian regime.
Sheridan Forbes in our chat says, Canada is finished, sadly. Brother homes will never be affordable again. The great Canadian peso is coming pounding out potatoes 99 cents, basically saying, yeah, it's so unaffordable in Canada right now, and Trudeau has run that country into the ground. It's going to take years for them to dig out of this mess. But hey, some good signs today.
Right. Well, some good signs for the end of the Obama era as Kamala Harris became the first woman to certify her own loss in a presidential election. You may recall that Al Gore had to do this when he lost the presidency to George Bush Jr. while he was still vice president, because that is the role of the current vice president. Sometimes we forget that Kamala Harris is still the vice president, but she is.
And the president of the Senate, by the way.
Yes, yeah. And that is her role as the president of the Senate. So here she was earlier today, because it's January 6th. She had to open the joint session of Congress to certify that the Trump-Vance ticket did win the election in 2024. Watch.
Mr. Speaker and members of Congress, pursuant to the Constitution and laws of the United States, the Senate and House of Representatives are meeting in joint session to verify the certificates and count the votes of the electors of the several states for President and Vice President of the United States.
We watched this with our children today because the school district extended the holiday to stick it to us, I guess. It's a little extra torture.
They're off for 2
parents.
Weeks. We don't need this one extra day.
We do not.
But anyway, we gave them
the
a civics
children
lesson.
did get to watch this, and the girls were like, "Oh, I feel so bad for her." Let me know how you feel. I do feel empathy. That had to be a hard thing for her to do, and after a really long and grueling presidential race. But that's the way it went. This is being called by the New York Post the end of the Obama era, and I really do appreciate this take, because Democrats are feeling a deep sense of betrayal. I don't know if it's actually betrayal, or people like me who were formerly liberals and identify as Democrats feel like, oh, the party is actually awful and murderous. But okay, that's another way to put it, is that they're betrayed. What do they mean, though, by the end of the Obama era? I like the way this is put. It's this illusion, this manifest destiny of the left adopted during the second Obama term that promises an ever diversifying electorate would inexorably vote Democrat and thus be patronized with cartoonish appeals to identity and big government. Yes to all of that, right? Isn't that what we're celebrating? Not necessarily the rise of Trump, but the death of this, which was utterly 1984-ish. We lived through it. They talked about DEI rules across federal agency, this rise of neo-racism where white people had to be punished for something they never did. Open borders that would buy Hispanic votes, the Green New Deal that would buy these environmentalists without actually giving them data on whether or not this would work or tank the economy, validating the rhetoric of pro-Hamas supporters. Then they talk about this second pillar of Obama era, which was the new industry of shadow government, which was NGOs. We've talked about this ad nauseum for the last 4 years. Consultants, activist groups, foundations such as the human rights groups getting their politics into law. It's been horrible. The third era of the Obama administration, he talks about here, or the third pillar, massive cancel culture with accompanying online authoritarianism. Yes, that has happened. Right. So that is actually what I was celebrating when these January 6 votes were certified today, less the rise of Trump, but the end of this absolute nightmare. I also blame Democrats for many deaths of innocent people abroad. Well, and in the United States, not just abroad, nationally as well.
Well, and Obama, of course, has been running the show from behind the scenes. And so this really, now they're out of power. They're out of power in the White House. They're out of power in the House, the Senate, in the Supreme Court. So now you're going to see them dissolving into these NGOs and these non-governmental organizations, these Obama.
Will they have the same power that they had under Democratic terms? This is something that those allied with the Trump administration have to watch for carefully. So is this really the end of that? Because that's an ugly monster. Could it morph into a different way that the Trump administration doesn't see? Who amongst us is going to hold their breath for this to actually be dead? Don't do that. You could die. Don't hold your breath for anything. Just watch for it. But okay, we're watching as at least this administration ends. So here, with that in mind, watch the moment that Harris certifies the second incoming Trump administration and the end of the Obama era.
The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes. Kamala D. Harris.
She tried to move on pretty quick. Well, I guess we'll allow them to stand and clap. She's like, and Kamala D. Harris, let me give you those numbers. And our chat room is saying they have zero empathy for her, by the way.
No?
Zero empathy.
Nobody?
Harris of the state of California has received 226 votes.
Second place rigging people.
The whole number of electors appointed to vote for Vice President of the United States is 538. Within that whole number, a majority is 270. The votes for Vice President of the United States are as follows. J.D.
So there you go.
The state of Ohio.
There was the...
I think they should have both stood for both. You ran a race. You should show mutual respect. Both sides of the aisle should should applaud each candidate.
That's never going to happen.
I can say that out loud on this show. It's my show.
You can say it, but it's never going to happen. Just like at the State of the Union address, the other side will never.
Look, we make our kids after a game walk up to the opponents and say, "Good game,
good game, good game."
You should do that. We should do that in politics.
But this was for the cameras,
okay. Yeah.
Well, the thing you have to remember,
we need it.
It is a uniparty, and they're in alignment. They're in alignment on so many issues, of course, and they are in major alignment right now on our next story. Do you ever have a feeling you're being surveilled and hesitate to share things of interest via text message or email with your friends and loved ones? Well, recently, outspoken parents at a PTA meeting and Catholic Americans have been labeled as domestic terrorists by the FBI. These types of labels can be used to allow the U.S. government to surveil its own citizens and others who live abroad without any legal due process. Fortunately, the founders of Bunker have created an app to uphold people's rights. Bunker is not beholden to any third-party corporation, investor, or government. Bunker deeply believes that privacy is a human right and that everyone on Earth deserves bank-level security. Bunker provides you protection from state and corporate surveillance, as well as cyber criminals. It includes a completely secure and private messenger, a robust password manager, secure cloud storage, and files for your documents. Bunker is built to uphold the rights of people and protect them from cyber crimes. Download Bunker from the App Store or the Google Play Store today. Use the offer code REDACTED to receive your first year for free. The corrupt House Republican Mike Turner is warning America that ISIS terrorists have infiltrated the United States and are plotting attacks on Americans right now. Oh my God, really? We need to go to war with Iran right now because clearly Iran's behind all of it. So we need to go to war right now. This is exactly what the Uniparty wants. So they are behind without the cameras, Republicans and Democrats, the neocons, all shaking hands, all excited about trying to push us into this war right now with this narrative about ISIS and Al-Qaeda terrorists. Of course, totally forgetting the fact that we created ISIS, that we fund them. We use them for regime change operations. This is where I've been really disappointed in a lot of the conservative media over the past 72 hours, parroting all of these FBI and CIA talking points. Wait a minute. We slam the FBI and the CIA on a regular basis as murderous organizations and corrupt organizations, right, on this show. They don't have the American interest at heart at all. They target Americans. And yet then the FBI and the CIA come out with information and talking points about ISIS, and the conservative media runs and say, oh, well, the FBI says. What? What the hell happened to you people? Wake up. So Mike Turner was on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday when he stated that the FBI and other intelligence agencies know for certain that ISIS and other terrorist groups are operating on U.S. soil. Listen to Turner.
Chair Turner, shortly after that, you said on this program, we have terrorists that are actively working inside the United States that are a threat to Americans. Do you know if there are active terror cells in the United States right now?
Well, I think the issue of cells, and you and I were talking about that at the beginning of the show, are there individuals that are affiliated with ISIS and terrorist groups and organizations that have crossed the border, that are inside the United States? Director Wray, FBI director, has said so. We certainly have intelligence that says so. I agree with his assessment. Jim has also seen it. He's testified before our committee publicly of that fact. those individuals are working in conjunction with ISIS with the intention of harming Americans. The director has said it directly.
They are known to U.S. intelligence and law enforcement.
And we are working diligently to try to take them down, to prevent them from doing so. And that's why the director is publicly saying such. And that's what the new administration is going to be handed. The fact that these individuals are here, that we need to locate them, we need to remove them, we need to bring them to justice and prevent them from doing harm to Americans.
It looked like I might have seen
Okay, so I'm sorry. The same people that you funded and organized to carry out regime change operations in Syria, Libya, and any other place that you want are now in the United States because you let them come into the United States openly, walk right across the U.S. southern border. So they're here. But now, suddenly, they're not on our payroll anymore. We know exactly where these people are. And now they want us all to be scared, use these false flags as an opportunity to go to war. Of course, Mike Turner, massively corrupt member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and of course, associated deeply with the intelligence community. He's there praising Christopher Wray. The guy lied to you. He lied to all of us in front of Congress about January 6th. He's lied to us repeatedly. So now we're trusting Christopher Wray? Really? This is what's happening? Remember when Tucker Carlson had David Grush on to talk about disclosure in the UFO program and found out, of course, that the stonewalling about this program came directly from Mike Rogers and Mike Turner. Watch Tucker's great response. Watch.
At what point will this become public?
So I'm glad you asked that. So I mentioned the Schumer amendments, the UAP Disclosure Act of 23. It's currently in conference. It's part of the fiscal year 24 National Defense Authorization Act, which is what funds the DoD and IC. But right now it's in a perilous position because as I'm told by staffers on the Hill, the House Armed Services and Intelligence Committees are trying to block it, specifically Mike Rogers and Mike Turner. They believe it's duplicative. It's not going to assist Arrow in any way. However, having
Mike Rogers and Mike Turner,
the mics, and the thing is this provides
two of the dumbest people in Washington.
So
just pure tools of the national security state.
So it helps them give top cover. It helps them declassify.
Pure tools of the national intelligence state. Pure tools of they. So when you see pure tools of the national intelligence state on television, telling you and spinning a narrative, there's a reason that CBS News put these people on this weekend. There's a reason that all of these people have been trotted out on television, Fox News and others. All the legacy media is playing into this narrative, of course, because they are tools of the intelligence state. They get information directly from the intelligence state. That's how it works, the Mockingbird media. Don't fall for it. Tim Burchett doesn't seem to be falling for it, and he published this just today. He said, we have got to quit funding the Taliban under Donald Trump. $40 million a week goes to our enemies. It's a slap in the face to those who've served. Now, I could go deeper than that, Congressman Burchett. Would love to have a congressman on to talk more about that. But the rot is deep, and they are pushing this narrative on all of us right now. Just get ready for President Trump to come in, and we're going to be, having to face this war with Iran, because that's exactly what the intelligence state does. And these tools of the intelligence community are being used as tools, exactly what they're meant for, right?
Yes.
Are we,
all right, pandemic.
Sorry, real quick, but are we as a nation ever going to figure out that this does not work, that arming groups to overthrow our enemies, eventually they come back to fight us? Are we just waiting until finally we get that one success story? I don't think we have any, do we?
No. I can't think of any. Have we ever armed a group that we
overthrow
and then we've bombed them? And no, there's never Libya, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan. I mean, the list is pretty endless at this point.
Vietnam.
Oh, we didn't arm. Well, we did arm the South Vietnamese, but of course not the North Vietnamese. But
right.
But no, I can't think of it. If anyone can, let us know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Pandemic Watch, you ready for this? We're tracking HMPV. We're going to
the attack dog will be cut loose by the empire because it will become too costly to maintain it. I'm reinforced majorly in my view expressed over the last 8 years that Israel won't be a state in a very short period of time.
We've seen almost daily strikes, hypersonic missiles fired into Israel by Yemen's Ansar Allah. Back in December, Larry, we saw that the Ansar Allah movement claimed that they downed an F-18 U.S. fighter jet in the Red Sea. They've also said that they have fired on U.S. aircraft carriers, naval aircraft carriers in the Red Sea as well. Now, everyone's claiming that the resistance is dead right now, Larry, but I'm curious, what do you make of Yemen's response to this over this time as they also, the Yemeni people, demonstrate in the streets of hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million people in solidarity with Gaza?
Frankly, Danny, the Yemenis seem to me to be irrepressible, inexhaustible, and incredible. They just don't seem to be able to be beaten other than a land invasion by several powers or a nuclear attack. They seem incredibly able to adapt, and they always have. Let me paint a little bit, we're talking West Asia, but let me paint a little bit of a tapestry that I think I have woven over the last 2 or 3 years, going back to my notes with my students and notes I took when I was chief of staff at the State Department and elsewhere. I think the Yemenis are a good place to start because if you look back over history, you know, the 3,000 years that we know quite a bit about, and even the 2,000 and the 5,000 that we don't know a lot about, but we have a lot of conjecture, especially from archaeologists and people like that. If you look over it, you have people like the Yemeni. You have people who, for example, take on the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, people like Vercingetorix and others, who play an incredible role in hindsight in bringing the end of the empire. And that might be the Yemeni's role right now, is to be, as I said, irrepressible and inexhaustible and just keep on fighting and fighting and fighting. I have no doubt, really, as a military professional who went to the Naval War College, who taught at the Naval War College, who has put this forward to his colleagues in the Navy for 2 decades now, that they're going to take out an aircraft carrier. Now, it might not be the Yemeni, but I put my money on them first and foremost right now, as long as we're not in a formal war with China, who will take out all of our aircraft carriers, probably in the first 90 days. And that's going to be, for the American people in the empire, a truly traumatic experience. The American people haven't been at war since 1865. Not really. World War II was fought over there. Thank you very much. They have not seen this kind of thing in their lifetime, certainly, and even in their grandchildren and grandfathers and, great-grandfathers' lifetime. They haven't seen this sort of thing. 100,000 casualties in a 10-day period. Maybe 250,000 in a 10-day period, except we can't put that many troops in the field, Navy, Air Force, or otherwise, to get them killed. But a carrier goes down, it's 5,000 souls. It's the entire air wing. It's $16 billion. And I would say there will be more than one if we get in a conventional war with China or Russia or both of them together, or even Iran. Should the Houthis do that? Watch out for what we do back to the Houthis. Watch out for a land invasion that would then probably keep going into Iran. Now, the counter to that is what I'm hearing, and I'm hearing it from good sources, that the Iranians feel like, some of them anyway, that they're in such a pickle right now that they have opened secret talks. I assume they're secret, probably through Oman or Qatar or someone like that. I would vouchsafe Oman, and because they seem to be really good at offering good offices for really intractable problems, and we're working on a nuclear deal. And they are anticipating Donald Trump being the person to come in and, with a little truculence and a little bombast, at least maybe give them a deal that might lift some of the sanctions, which are, as with Syria before, doing a lot of damage in Iran. So that could throw a wrinkle into that if the Iranians are suddenly working with the empire and are not there to continue to support the Yemeni, because probably a precondition of the deal, one of them, would be that they stop their support for the Houthis. But I think that would be just temporary, because this is too volatile, and just if Israel is our attack dog, Israel will always keep the place roiled up because the empire thinks confusion is conducive to this arrestment of power shift. Confusion and chaos, I should say. You could call it the C squared, confusion and chaos. That's what we're doing in Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Romania. That's what we're doing in West Asia and the Levant. And Israel, our attack dog can have Lebanon, it can have Gaza, it can have parts of Egypt, it can have Jordan, ultimately. If I were the king of Jordan right now, I'd be sweating bullets. When I read George W. Bush's 2002 National Security Strategy, a public document, not classified. And that strategy essentially said, anyone who rises even imperceptibly at the bottom of our mountain, we will smash with sanctions, with military power, or with both. And increasingly now, we will use our allies as proxies to do so. So I began to ask myself, why is this such an adamant position taken by clearly an administration that had provocation of 9/11 and other things, but more or less molding itself into what I've been seeing going on since World War II as a professor of that period? And I've come to the conclusion, and I'm trying to put this in a little bit more of a concrete format, but it basically says in 3,000 years of human history that we know most about, the incredible power in the world, if you will, political, cultural, informational, intelligence, military, all the elements of power we like to classify today belong to the East. And the sucking mechanism, if you will, the supportive mechanism, the cashier of that power was China. We like to forget that today, of course. They don't forget it. And I've been in their Central Party school. I know they don't forget it. What's happening today is after that power for 3 millennia lingered very powerfully and for a long time in the East, in about 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella started some navigational exercises we all know about, but most Americans haven't a clue as to what they really meant. That shifted or began to shift that power majorly. Europe was already trying to shift it, but it was not being very successful. What comes out of the New World, if you will, is the rape, pillage, and plunder of entire civilizations in North, Central, and South America at unbelievable, fathomless wealth characteristics. I mean, Spain was so rich, it ruined its guilds, its business guilds. It didn't need business anymore. It was so filthy rich. So the Spanish Empire grew, the French Empire grew, and most of all, the British Empire grew to be that one which had a motto that the sun never set upon it, which was preposterous. It certainly did. But it was one of the largest in terms of earthly expanse empires that the world had seen in all those now some 4,000 years. Well, along came America in 1945, and a unique empire was born. An empire that did indeed span the entire globe, that created military fiefdoms for the entire globe, put a 4-star general or admiral in charge of each of those fiefdoms, and most of all, invented by stealing the world's scientists and some of its own nuclear weapons. No empire in history, none, period, zilch, ever had the capability to destroy the human race as a riposte to its diminishment in power. Mughal, Mongol, Ottoman, you name the empire, Eastern or Western Roman. None of them could do this, certainly not the British. We can't. What are we looking at today? We're looking at a massive countershift. The power, political, cultural, informational intelligence is going back to the East, with China as a powerful magnet sucking it back to the East. 1 in 5 on the world surface is a Chinese. 2 in 5 is a Chinese or an Indian. 3 in 5 is an Asian. This is inexorable, and we're fighting it tooth and nail in this belt of chaos that we're creating from the Baltic to Chabahar and Bandar Abbas at the southern end of the Persian Gulf. It is our attempt to arrest this shift in power. And Israel is not a product of the Jewish lobby, as Mearsheimer and Walt say. I'm convinced of that now. They're our attack dog. They're doing precisely what the empire wants them to do in Southwest Asia. And as long as that goes on, they can probably seem themselves inexhaustible in carrying out what we want them to do. But I think it's going to end And I think it's going to end abruptly for this attack dog. And here's something people don't understand. We will cut that dog loose as fast as greased lightning if we have to. If it becomes inimical to this interest to stop this power shift, we'll cut Israel loose. And I think it might be getting close to that point where we cut them loose.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to start with Yemen in this region, because as you've talked about, Larry, this region of West Asia is so critical to cutting off the rise of this new world. And Yemen and Ansar Allah are seen as very small players in this regard, but they made themselves very, very big over the course of this last year, taking this, even in this moment of declared victory for the empire, what I call a temporary reprieve. They've continued their strikes on Israel. And we also have seen, Larry, that Israel itself is still in the best shape. We have reports of suicides way up in the Israeli Defense Forces. We also have reports that still there is no end in sight to what's going on in Gaza, not only because Israel wants to destroy the entire place, but also because Palestinians are fighting back. What's your take on this narrative then? Because a lot of people are saying the opposite of what you're saying, that Israel's end is actually nowhere near in sight anymore, especially after the fall of Syria.
Those are all good points, but I think they are generated chiefly by the propaganda machine that First Jerusalem has, which is unsurpassed. It's just pure lies, but they propagandize those lies really effectively. And the propaganda machine that the empire has, which has a lot more territory to concentrate on, if you will, than Israel. Netanyahu the other day talking about how little Israel was and putting the maps up. I wanted to say, you little son of a bitch. Of course you're little. But look what you've got behind you. You've got the American empire behind you with 750 military bases in the spans of the world and nuclear weapons. So the propaganda machine of Israel is just unmatchable. But the empire does a pretty good job too. And you've got situations now in this country where my people whom I talk to on a daily basis sometimes question the things that people like Scott Ritter, Doug McGregor, and I and others say, and they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't know what they're talking about. You parse it closely with them because they're getting their information from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and a host of other media outlets in this country that are wholly owned by the empire. That's the problem in this country in terms of getting the word to average Americans. Once you get an average American down who has even a modicum of common sense and maybe a little education, and you talk to them seriously about the situation, you can get them to begin to think and to begin to question what's happening. But it's tough. You've got to almost go one at a time. So as long as these propaganda machines exist and are fueled with the huge amounts of money, one thing I didn't point out is watching all of this shift, this power shift, watching all of it as the Rothschilds, for example, watched it in a previous century, as J.P. Morgan watched it in a previous century. All of these people, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Group, they have names now, are already relocated almost completely to Davos. And they will relocate to capitals in the new powers of the world when they feel it's necessary. So watch those financial capitals and those financial people and what they do and where they go and where their money winds up, because that's the real teller of when this shift is taking on unstoppable dimensions. And I think that's what we're seriously worried about. And our debt does not give us at all a high ground to stand on to do this.
Larry, do you think that Ansar Allah, the Houthis, that they downed the F-18 fighter jet reported in December?
I looked into it as far as I could. My contacts aren't as good as they used to be, but I thought it was maybe a Vincennes type incident. You remember when Vincennes, 88, I think it was, shot down the Iranian Airbus in the Persian Gulf. The CIC got Combat Information Center, Command Information Center got confused, and at least that's what the record seems to reflect, and shot down and killed 177 Iranian civilians, as I recall. So it's not impossible that we could have shot the aircraft down ourselves with a confused CIC, especially if a lot of missiles were coming in and such. But the more I look at it, the more I think the Houthis might be truthful, that they actually shot the aircraft down. And of course, the empire wouldn't admit it.
Right now, the situation in West Asia, it has that look to it that you have just described. Everyone right now is anointing Israel essentially invincible. They've expanded into Syria. Iran is, as you said, regrouping and looking toward possible negotiations to ease its own situation. At the same time, though, you had Iran's supreme leader talk about how a lot of these, the axis of resistance has its own domestic capabilities. And Hezbollah, even though after the ceasefire, there's been this narrative spread that Hezbollah was defeated, Hezbollah is saying through Sheikh Qassam that after the 60-day ceasefire, it is very possible that there is a resumption of the armed resistance to Israel, given the violations and given all the indications that Israel has no intention of letting Lebanon alone. So what do you make of this overall situation for Israel? Like, do you see, you've made the point many times that, Israel is in a lot more dire situation than maybe is led on in the mainstream media. Do you see that continuing here forward into 2025 as the 60-day ceasefire in Lebanon stops, as Yemen continues its strikes on Israel, and as, of course, there are talks, and there will be talks, it seems like in 2025, of possible attack on Iran, as these recent Biden leaks seem to indicate?
I'm reinforced majorly in my view expressed over the last 8 years, particularly over the last 2 years, that Israel won't be a state in a very short period of time. The attack dog will be cut loose by the empire because it will become too costly to maintain it. Part of the reasons I say that are what you just suggested. There are tactical and operational reasons to suggest that. There hasn't been a ceasefire with Lebanon. Israel has violated the ceasefire every day. The only reason they quieted down and agreed to, quote, a ceasefire, unquote, was because we asked them to help us with Syria. And Turkey concurred. So they had to divert a few forces and, we can take lots of the Golan that we don't presently have? Let's go. So they got this ceasefire going, but they never stopped killing Lebanese every single day, or bombing this or bombing that every single day. Not as extravagantly as they were bombing Syria, for example, but they never ceased fire. Hezbollah did, to a certain extent. A few people crossed here, crossed there, giving the Israelis their excuses for violating the ceasefire. But Hezbollah needed the time to rearm and re-equip, and probably to retrain some people. They've learned some things with regard to how they pretty readily defeated the Israelis in their incursion. Not quite as effectively as 2006, but they did, I think, achieve more success than the Israelis did against them. They want to repeat that and deepen it and amplify it. So they needed a lot more to do that with. And I'm being told now by some reliable sources that they have reestablished the line of communications, line of contact, line of support, whatever you want to call it, LOC, LOS, military terms, so they can get supplies. And I've been asking the question, is it maritime? Because I'm really worried about the submarines the Israelis operate in the Eastern Mediterranean. They would take those ships out in a heartbeat. We have a phenomenon right now, Danny, of ships all over the world. Don't talk about the Russian secret fleet as those mighty, powerful military giants the Baltic states do, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. Don't talk about the secret Russian fleet. Talk about the secret U.S. fleet. Talk about all the steamers and ships in the world that are going around with all kinds of cargo that have Lloyd's of London, for example, putting their agents in ports with clipboards, trying to figure out if the ship coming into port at that moment is one they've got insured and take them to task for turning their transponders off and so forth. So I'm sure that if they have a maritime connection for new missiles, ammunition, and such, that it is probably running around with its transponders off too, just as the Iranians are, just as the Russians probably are with oil, just as others probably are with oil too. By the way, all the JP-8 that Israel is getting that it needs for these massive airstrikes, other than the 300,000, I think it is, barrels a day, and that's not very much when you think about 20,000 going one flight, that they can refine is coming from ExxonMobil. Good old ExxonMobil shipping it to Israel. Is it going there on U.S. flagships? No, probably not. Is it going on tram steamers with, how is it going there? This is part of what I say that the empire is going to have to take very close scrutiny of as Israel gets deeper and deeper into the problems, and they are in deep problems.
Right, so since the fall of Syria to Israel's erstwhile allies / convenient patsies HTS, and the result of that being Lebanon and therefore Hezbollah ostensibly being cut off from the so-called axis of resistance of Iran, and with a response from Iran still expected following a third attack on them by Israel last October, the more time that passes, the less likely that seems, much of the Western media narrative has been of Iran now being a spent force, now cut off from Hezbollah and Hamas, now reliant on their alliance with the Houthis in Yemen and Islamic resistance in Iraq. Their capabilities neutered somewhat. That's what the narrative's been. But this speaks more of a misplaced Western optimism than any sense of reality. That said, though, if Iran are to be of relevance in the Middle East going forwards, they can't afford to sit on their laurels about it either. Their economy continues to become ever weaker and more fragile, and war is probably inevitable. The desire for Iran to be overthrown by the US has been nailed on for years, and the weaker they get now, the more softened up they are for a final push against them. So whatever Iran have planned, time is of the essence, but they do have a plan, a military plan, and if they finally enact it, not only is Israel probably finished, but Iran's survival may actually depend on it. It's go big soon or go home and just wait for their inevitable demise. Right, so Iran have a plan of action, do they, Damo? Well, yes, they seem to. Indeed, they do. That's just what's being said anyway. Something that has been discussed on and off over the last several months, in fact, in various foreign media. A hypothetical plan that has become more and more of a do-or-die plan since the fall of Syria, particularly, with the Al-Qaeda and Islamic State cast-offs of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, and their leader, now the de facto president of Syria, though without an election anytime soon, he's little more than a pro-Zionist petty dictator at this point, a head chopper in a suit trying to bond with Netanyahu's genocidal apartheid state. And in that vein, is very forthcoming about how much disdain he has for the likes of Iran, though his ire is finally and increasingly being vented over Israel as well, refusing to be his best friend on one hand and consistently taking more and more Syrian territory on the other. This plan of Iran's, though, which you may have heard mention of, is called Operation True Promise 3. True Promise being a Muslim concept referring to their version of Judgment Day, when the final judgment of humanity will be carried out by Allah. It is called the True Promise because Allah guaranteed it would happen. And so the Iranians have called this plan, and the two that came before it, the same thing, because they've also guaranteed that it will happen. What exactly is Operation True Promise 3 then, therefore? Fundamentally, it is Iran declaring war on Israel at its most simplest, but it is more than that, because it is Iran taking on the US as well. And ultimately, that is always going to be the bigger issue for Iran, if there's to be any long-term peace and a return to some kind of stability in the Middle East. You see, for years, and for a lot of people, they still believe this is the main reason for US interests in the Middle East, is centered around oil, the acquisition of oil fields by the US, access to oil markets. But if you think about it, they already have access to the vast majority of that now. Following the wars in Iraq, they gained access to their oil. The US, along with the Kurds, already control much of the oil fields in Syria. They trade readily with Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern states. Aside from Iran itself, the US isn't short of access to oil these days in the Middle East. So why are they spending so much time, therefore, so much effort, so much resources, not to mention billions upon billions of dollars in the Middle East still? And ultimately, their reason for doing this boils down to Israel now. It is protecting their proxy, their strategic military asset in the Middle East, their ally. And it doesn't matter what Israel does or says, the support is unquestioning. It's why Genocide Joe, despite having reputedly called Netanyahu a very bad guy, is still hell-bent on sending billions more to Israel before he's dumped out of power, and why Donald Trump will very much continue to do likewise. So for Iran to move against Israel, to take Israel out, removes their real foe from the chessboard, so to speak, which is the US. Israel in and of itself is rather weak. Without the US, it is nothing. We more and more become readily aware of this as a simple fact, really. Its economy is now on its knees. It has been described historically as being weaker than a spider's web. The words of the assassinated Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, in case you wondered who said that. But for the US, Iran represents everything they absolutely do not want people across the world to see. For all the justifiable issues surrounding human rights, the fact the theocratic nation came into being off the back of a coup, the fact that it has, despite that, stood the test of time and has existed and persisted in that form since 1979, does speak to the capability of a self-sufficient and independent Muslim state. So much so they have become the main sponsors of the Axis of Resistance, are seen as the head of this movement, which includes the Houthis, Islamic resistance in Iraq, Hamas, Hezbollah, and of course formerly Syria played a role in that too. But that is now gone, separating Axis members from one another, as that has, because Syria was central to this. And this has led to a belief and a narrative that Iran have suffered a devastating blow and will struggle to ever return from that. Now, I mentioned earlier in my intro that we were still awaiting a third retaliation from Iran for that strike in late October by Israel. This is exactly what Operation True Promise 3 is. The previous two retaliations for Israeli attacks back in July and early October of last year, very much being Operation True Promise 1 and True Promise 2. We're wondering what they were. But this time it is different. And this is a message that was conveyed last November by Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, which has been detailed in the Iran Press News Agency from that time. An excerpt of that reading. In response to a question about the timing of the Operation True Promise 3, Abbas Araghchi told commanders and staff at the IRGC command headquarters, this is something you should answer. He added, the Operation True Promise 2, like the Operation True Promise 1, was a defensive measure, meaning it was a response to an attack. However, we have informed the international community that the aggressive assault by the Zionist regime on Iranian soil is a new invasion, and we will certainly respond at the appropriate time. We will not forfeit our right to retaliate. Araghchi said, as you know, decisions regarding this matter are made elsewhere. However, I can say that over the past 12 months, we have acted with particular intelligence and prudence. Our decisions have not been impulsive or emotional, and we have responded at the appropriate time, taking into account all conditions, probabilities, and enemy conspiracies. An awkward truth, but yeah, Iran has a right to defend itself too, and its right to retaliate is still there hanging in the air. Note the line there about the first two operations being defensive measures, implying this third attack won't be, since they considered it now a new invasion by Israel. That said, however, since November, we've seen the fall of the Assad regime, of course, haven't we? And this means if Iran are to keep their true promise for the third time, the window of opportunity is closing for them. The reason for that is that Iran's economy is tanking too, and has been for quite a while. Where the government there blame US sanctions for that have decimated the value of the Iranian rial, for instance, and inflation in Iran sits at 33%. There is rampant poverty. There are gas and power shortages, regular outages. Pollution makes the air almost unbreathable out there, and rents are getting hiked by 50% on a year-by-year basis. Where Iran continues to make technological advances, though, the government has not invested in infrastructure which would ease the economic burden on families. And when roughly a third of the population are all employed by the state, economic health or growth, however you prefer to look at that, is not good with the ratio being like that. But if the first two True Promise operations were defensive measures, then True Promise 3 cannot be about simply attacking Israel again and then expecting things to be different this time around, and then not attack back for a fourth time. If this is about stabilizing the Middle East, bringing peace for the long term, then its aims have to be about bringing the US to the negotiating table. Now, Iran have tried to do this before. To get the US to negotiate with them, they put their nuclear research capabilities on the table to the Bush administration in 2003, as a for instance, and they got ignored roundly. So unfortunately, it seems like a show of force is going to be the only way to get US attention here, and deploying that against Israel, who they still have a right of retaliation against in the name of self-defense, sovereign nation, as Iran is. But it hurts me to write this because violence is never the answer. It should never be the answer. And it won't be the final answer this time either. But sadly, the US don't seem interested in negotiating with Iran unless they get forced into it. And so at this point in time, at this juncture, what alternative to that could there be? Because I really wish I could see another one. Reinforcing that, though, is what happened in Syria. A big blow to Iran, as that was. It was great news for Iran's enemies, Israel, the US, and they have become more emboldened with both Netanyahu and mouthpieces in Washington, notably Donald Trump's biggest Zionist backer of them all, the billionaire Miriam Adelson, now agitating for war with Iran. Adelson's late husband once suggested that the US should just drop a nuke on Iran and solve the problem that way. Charming pair. So with a closing window and a retaliation on par with the last two True Promise operations not really cutting the mustard if they go for that again this time, if Iran is to affect lasting change anyway and get the US talking to them, what will it take? The military scale must match the political objectives, as someone famous once said, I'm sure. Striking civilian areas, as Iran has gone to lengths to avoid previously, only striking military targets can't be the answer either, because that's what Israel always do. And if the political objective is to burst their bubble and open the eyes of other people around the world, they need to not stoop to their level, but they do need to shake up their game. One claim that has persisted is that Iran have not shown their full hand where their military capabilities are concerned. In previous strikes, it's been argued they let much of their ordnance be shot down by Israel's air defenses as well. So if they were to demonstrate that that was the case, and that Israeli air defenses, not least the US THAAD system they've deployed, are actually completely futile against a more beefed up Iranian response, that will go a long way to opening up the eyes of the world. Targeting infrastructure like power stations and refineries, especially in key areas like Tel Aviv, would also rattle cages as long as it doesn't take lives when they do it. But that's the rub with war. What do you think, though? Will Iran respond? Will they keep their true promise? Will it be different this time? Will they stoop to Israel's level, or do you think they're better than that? Do let me know your thoughts on this in the comments.
What we have been seeing with drones is the operational use of gravity propulsion systems, which I'm going to have you explain what that is. It's at this point supposedly a theoretical technology. It's not something that is supposedly out there and actually been able to be used. It's theoretical only. But you've been saying all along, and also there's others like you that have been saying things like Dr. Sean Greer, who've been saying this stuff is not theoretical at all. They have it and they've been developing it and using it. But let me just get to the rest, and then we're going to start off with what that technology is. So he says these drones, what we're seeing are drones, the use of operational gravity propulsion systems, powered aircraft by most recently China on the East Coast. But throughout history, the U.S. has also used them. Only we in China have this capability. Our OPCEN which is Operations Center, says the location for this activity is in the box below. China has been launching them from the Atlantic from submarines for years, but this activity recently has picked up. As of now, it's just a show of force, and they're using it similarly to how they use the balloon for signal in ISR, which ISR stands for Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. So that's just like gathering data. He says, so he's talking about the balloon that was seen floating over the United States and then shot down. Says these are all part of these integrated comm systems. There are dozens of these balloons in the air at any given time, he says. And then he says the so what is because of the speed and stealth of these unmanned aircraft. They are the most dangerous threat to national security that has ever existed. They basically have an unlimited payload capacity. So that's meaning they could carry a large amount of equipment or weapons. And he says they could park it over the White House if they wanted. It's checkmate. Okay. So now he's saying China's got it. China's coming after us with these. Tell us what, first of all, I'm curious about what you think about those claims. But tell me what you think. First of all, give us the rundown of gravity propulsion technology, this theoretical technology.
First of all, that's not just a passing reference he put in that letter. That's like 5-6 paragraphs where he's talking through this, and For me, actually, someone pointed out, like, do you think he was a fan of your work at this point? Because it's so bizarrely directly connected to what, like, yes, I've been saying, and people like Stephen Greer and many others. You know, I'm relatively new on this whole scene of looking into this, but yeah, absolutely. That contrary to what academia and the mainstream media would say, is that we can understand gravity, and these black projects or defense contractors that have been doing experiments that are not publicly known have figured out gravity for a long time. And maybe they figured it out from UFO aliens, whatever. Maybe they dug something up in the Sahara Desert related to the lost city of Atlantis. I don't know. But I do know that they've figured that out, and we've got that level of technology. And my research shows that it is related to like plasma, cold plasma, non-equilibrium plasmas, where you can actually just make a bubble in space-time and have energy trapped in that region, much like a ball of lightning, which is actually why they call it a ball of lightning. And then you can move it around like a drone. And the reason why this was so specific in his letter, where he says about the payload, is that the payload for a weapon like this is like a lightning strike from Zeus being struck down. And then it's just a question of, well, if you can zap multiple together, what does that do to whatever's inside of that? Are they just completely annihilated? Does it teleport them somewhere else? And that kind of payload can't be stopped. And if you scale it up, it's very easy to see how this becomes something that is extremely dangerous to society in general, because it's potentially infinitely more powerful than any atomic bomb that we currently use today, and then potentially unstoppable. And if two warring factions were to have that level of advanced technology, how long do we have on this planet before we annihilate ourselves? And then how do we, if this energy, this weaponry is also the secret to unlimited energy for all of society, can we use that in a good way before we get to a point where we, annihilate ourselves, I guess? That's the big question here.
Right. So the way that this tech it's kind of break it down a little bit, the science a little. I mean, I know it's probably difficult to do because it's like if everybody could do it, they would be.
No, so the simplest thing you understand is that 0 point energy is energy that's all around us, and it's experimentally proven to exist. The controversial part becomes whether or not we think this is like a small amount of energy, or if it's a significant amount of energy. And quantum mechanics says it's a significant amount of energy. General relativity says, no, it's insignificant. You can't tap into it at all. This is where people like Richard Feynman, who was a Nobel Prize winner in 1965 for quantum electrodynamics, he is one of the people that calculated that this energy was enough where the energy in the empty space of a coffee cup was enough to vaporize all the Earth's oceans. So we can tell what side of the argument he's on. He's on the side of the argument that it's this huge amount. And I think that's going to be proven to be true, is that we are in this vast amount of energy all the time. So if that's the case, then, you have to think of it in terms of the same thing like wind and solar, but it's even better than that. It's just all around us all the time. But that there are implications for manipulating at it, because it means that we are basically in this equilibrium that we don't experience of energy all around us. And even if we pull out all the energy that we think is there, all the temperature, there is still this vast amount of energy down there that we can still tap into. And this energy then represents an unlimited amount of real green energy. It doesn't require the sun to be coming down on us. But like Einstein showed, is that mass and energy, while they are interchangeable, mass is energy. At the same time, if we pull the energy out of there or add energy to it, we're manipulating space-time. So we're manipulating time itself. So this becomes very dangerous, because now we're talking about this ability to manipulate this medium of energy that we're in is a way where we can pull a huge amount of energy out. We can create a big explosion, but we can also actually change the rate of time for either people that were like occupied in a bubble within it, or just people that are near it in general. So it's a paradigm shift of technology that I think that a lot of people struggle with comprehending compared to where we are at publicly right now, just because of those massive leaps in understanding of just reality in general. So
right. Okay.
how I want to tie this real quick back to the incident with the letter is that, this guy I think that the theories that are pervading out there are, one, that somebody took him out because he had some information. The other theory that, okay, maybe he was just making this all up, which I have a hard time believing because I think a lot of it's true. But maybe he was, right. And maybe he was just somebody who was into like the UFO stuff and wrote this up, but it's really specific. And then the other theory that, Huge was just wanting to make a statement and he was trying to whistleblow this information. He's bringing it to people like Sean Ryan with this information that's out there. And I want to preface this, I'm not saying this is what caused it, but when people are exposed to that level of awakening of that we have this technology, like, wow, how has this been kept hidden? What does this mean for our place in the universe and our society in general? It has a huge impact on your psyche. It really does. And like some people can compartmentalize it and go on with their day and doesn't impact them at all. And other people, like they have an adverse reaction to it. So this is part of the reason why it's like you have to kind of wake people up with this idea that like we are not at the pinnacle of society right now. We have not the highest. This is not going to be the most technologically advanced we're ever going to get. It's going to get way, way crazier than where we're at right now.
Okay, so I mean, according to his email, he didn't really seem to be thinking like the way that you're looking at this tech and the way that like Dr. Sean Greer looks at this tech, for instance, which is this tech is incredible in what it can do for mankind. Yes, it has potential for destruction, right? Because when you're talking about that much energy and like inside of a coffee cup that it could annihilate, that is a very, very powerful weapon. But it's also a very powerful energy source that would wipe out major multi-billion-dollar industries, right? I mean, we wouldn't need all of these mega industries that, I mean, just think about the power and money in the oil industry. And now we're seeing those sectors shift to like solar, wind, right? All of these different techs. And it's like, yeah, but if we could make energy out of nothing, then suddenly all of the big power players become extremely antiquated. It's like the invention of commercial air flight versus trains. People just don't ride on trains anymore. And so the one of the theories that's been out there is the reason why this type of technology has existed and not been shared is for those two specific reasons, right? The fact that it could be used, this type of tech could be used to annihilate. It's like nuclear power. Nuclear is amazing, right? Nuclear gives a lot of people a lot of energy, but nuclear also is nuclear, and that could be very scary technology. So it's that same sort of thing, like, oh my gosh, what if other nations suddenly got a hold of this type of energy source? They could also make extremely powerful weapons with this energy source. So that is, and then the other reason why they don't want to share it is because it would wipe out industries, and there's just too much lobby money in these power players. They just don't want these industries to come forward. So that's been the thinking. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, let me just add on to it too, is that you're saying all the right stuff now. And I love that you're coming to this conclusion. I'm not even saying anything. You've already come to these conclusions. You realize how big that is. All those things you just said, like it almost seems insurmountable. But at the same time, that's what this technology represents. That's the big secret. That's the national security issue. Aliens aren't a national security issue. It's like, oh, there's life out there. Okay, great. How's that a national security issue to our planet? It's not. If it was, they wouldn't be able to talk about it. So that's the stuff they're allowed to talk about. And then they say, oh, well, if you ask about the energy source for these UFOs, now it's a national security issue, just what you said. Is it the same thing that it can produce these weapons, like what we're seeing in this MH370 video here? That's an energy source as well. And in this video where it flashes, you can see the light reflect off the cloud. This is something that, like when we talked before, I didn't fully understand the physics of this, but when you're actually tapping into this 0-point energy, there's an effect called the dynamic Casimir effect. And a large electromagnetic flux basically pulls light out of the ether, photons. And you can find this experiment out there that I just mentioned, dynamic Casimir effect, proven to pull light out of nothing. And that's what's happening with this flash that we see dynamically lighting the clouds. This is not just a glow effect. It's actually accurately illuminating the cloud in 3 dimensions right there, which goes to show that if this video were fake, they would have to be using a 3-dimensional environment to produce it, which makes it much, much more complicated than just some kind of bored kid or what have you that's out there. And I think this video proves that we have crazy advanced technology beyond what the public thinks. And gravitic drones and anti-gravity is just a property of interacting with this 0 point energy. If you remove the energy out there, plasma naturally, if you zap some lasers, you can produce this cold plasma, and it looks like it's just floating freely there. And the moment we figured out how to break it free and let it move around however we want, then you get what you're seeing in this video, where we can start to do basically magic with it.
Yeah.
And this is like, what the government says, where like, people say, oh, the government's military's 30 years ahead. The people like Stephen Greer, and I'm not affiliated with Stephen Greer. I don't even agree with all of this stuff, but I do think he's right about the technology stuff. And I wish him the best. I think that everybody should attack this disclosure thing however they want. I'm choosing to attack it by the technology. I think that this technology is like 100 to 1,000 years more advanced than we would be if we weren't knocking on the door right now demanding answers based on like what we see in videos like this, where we have a real plane missing 10 years later still, and we've got military footage here. One more real quick, and then I'll let you ask anything you want. Is that we also recently trying to figure out like what is this video that we're looking at here? It's got this weird blue tinge. It's nighttime. So whatever this is some kind of computer rendered tracking system. It turns out something called WAMI, wide area motion imagery. And it's actually beyond what I even thought. I had deduced, okay, it's satellites beaming data together to ground-based computers, and then they're logging in. That is what they're doing. But it actually can pull information from multiple assets at the same time too. So they can have like high altitude airplanes, spy planes, things like that. Drones have these packages on them, and they can combine this with the satellite, the low Earth orbit satellites as well. And then they just have like, a virtual Google playback. That's why when you're watching the camera, you're really just watching somebody on a computer screen. And it looks as well like what happens here is that this is a window. What happens is they have a wide view and you like click somewhere and this window pops up. And it looks like they recorded the window and then they move the screen, the visual around on the window when they're shifting around until it gets to this part and the plane disappears. And then they move the window again. And then all of a sudden it goes up and it looks like they minimize or close the window because it keeps recording, but it's black. And then the original footage. This might just prove that it's actually from one of these military software spy systems that they've got out there. It's a huge reveal. And so for me, it's just like, I'm just waiting for people to catch on to like, this is definitely military footage, not just some kid put that together and figured out how to make it look like that.
Where did you get this video?
So, and this is just a compilation right here of one of the, you can kind of switch through the other videos that I was sending you guys, but this one where a lot of people ask about, okay, well, where's the source of this? Like I wasn't given this information directly. And I would argue this is almost better, is that it was information that was just found on the internet. Videos that were found on the internet were proven to go back to just weeks after the plane disappeared. In fact, that previous video I just showed you, that one was on the internet just 70 days at most after the plane disappeared. And in it, it said description received March 12th, 2014, 4 days after the plane disappeared. And it was some small random YouTube account. So people were thinking, okay, maybe they did this because it was some kind of hoax to, I don't know, draw attention, but they never really drew attention to it. And they never really were like, hey, here's the missing plane that everybody's talking about. And the more and more you look at the videos and realize there's two videos from two different perspectives. One's in thermal. In this one here, you can see that the orb actually interacts with the smoke coming out of the back of the plane. You can see the accurate fluid dynamics on it. And some of these small details, there's no way anybody that's not a true professional is going to add in some small detail like this as well. So I think that the more we start to realize that we do have like anti-gravitic drones, like what the Cybertruck guy, Matt Livelsberger, like he was talking about, the sooner we realize we have that level of technology, I think the sooner that we will be able to kind of free ourselves from the shackles of energy dependence. Because you're right, I think this technology represents two different things. And so here's, anyway, the other video. One other thing I want to point about the propulsion. You see these lines, they're kind of faint, but they're kind of they're in front of these orbs. At first it looks like they're behind the orbs. But these orbs as well, you can see a heat signature in them. This is the gravitic propulsion. This is, if I was just to imagine, what would gravitic propulsion look like? That's exactly what I would imagine if you're looking at from 0-point energy perspective. You're pulling the energy out in front of you, and this changes the force of gravity as pressure force that we feel. And if you change that pressure force, you're going to pull yourself forward, just like if you were on a conveyor belt. You know, you're not moving, this conveyor belt moving. That's how you should imagine gravitic propulsion. Or like on a surfboard. Like that's why they call it surfing. That's what they call it. That's why the gravity, they consider it, they use the analogy of surfing, because that's what you're doing. You're basically putting, with Miguel Alcubierre's warp drive, you're putting negative energy in front of you, positive energy behind you, and you're riding the surfway. You're riding the wave. So that's what these things are doing. And the idea is, well, why have somebody inside of it at all? You can just use, if the plasma is the secret that makes the anti-gravity and makes the bubble in space-time, do you really want to be inside of that? No, we just turn into a drone. Have it be an autonomous vehicle. And then you don't have to worry about it. That's what it's hard to believe that they've actually been that advanced since like 2014. But the more I think about it, the more I think, well, they could be even more advanced than that. Like in this particular, this means, if this is real right here, this means that somebody figured out that not only can make these balls of plasma, but they have such a high charge energy density that if you jam them together, it rips through what we would consider the ceiling in space-time. Like, oh, sorry, too much energy, boom, breaking right through. But we have terminology for that in general relativity. We call it a wormhole. You rip through, you basically rip through the geometry, the curvature of space-time itself by putting too much electromagnetic energy in a small space. And if you make a bubble of that, then that's what we would consider, sending something through a wormhole. It's hard to believe that I'm the guy out of everybody in the world that is revealing that, okay, this might be real and we've got wormholes here, but that's what I think is happening. And I think that if I turn out to be right about all this physics, about these plasma drones and what have you, then people need to look at this video and really ask the United States government, like, what did we do to that airplane?
Kofi, follow me.